completion's sake, I think it's only fair for me to provide you with the findings from my complaints. Let's start with the Maryland State Department of Education. Allegation number 1, provision of the student's IEP to the out-of-state residential school. Each public agency must ensure that a child's IEP is accessible to each regular education teacher, special education teacher, related services provider, and any other service provider who is responsible for implementing that IEP, as well as the specific accommodations and modifications and supports that must be provided for the child in accordance with the IEP 34 CFR 300.323. So based on the findings, Maryland State Department of Education did find this to be a violation because the IEP was not provided to the Bancroft School. Therefore, the school did not have access to the services that he was required to receive. And it's documented by the state that this resulted in the supports and services not being provided for the 22-23 school year, in accordance with 34 CFR 300.101 and .323. Allegation number 2. Ensuring that the student's IEP included psychological services and counseling to address the interfering behaviors. Based on the findings, Howard County Public School has not ensured that the student's IEP included appropriate psychological services and counseling to address interfering behaviors since May 2022, in accordance with 34 CFR 300.324. Interestingly, Howard County did not provide my son with compensatory services for psychological counseling services during that school year that he had no IEP, because the Bancroft School provided them with some false documentation stating that they were providing these services all along. However, it's not documented anywhere on his prior IEP, nor was it documented on the current IEP because there was no current IEP. The Bancroft School provided me with an email on September 27th, 2022, stating that they were requesting an alternative placement for my son because they could not provide him with the psychological services and counseling, and they stated that he would really benefit from that service. Because they could not provide it, they were recommending an alternative placement. During that time, Ms. Jessica Kerr, my son's former caseworker, was supposedly in the process of looking for placements for him outside of Bancroft, because Bancroft had already determined that they could not meet the needs for the psychological services and counseling. So during that entire year, no one was looking for placements for my son. Matter of fact, Ms. Kerr was supposed to be working with the Bancroft School's admissions office to find him off-campus housing because supposedly the campus housing that they had at Bancroft was only for pediatrics. At age 21, he would have to leave. So at some point, apparently she had just stopped looking and did not tell me because Howard County had already made a decision to continue his placement at Bancroft. So the really interesting part here is because Bancroft said that they could not meet his psychological counseling needs, you would think that Howard County would have been more on top of finding him a different placement. However, instead of finding him a different placement, during that meeting with Mr. Barnes, Dr. Savage, and Ms. Gunshore, they decided to keep him at a placement where his needs really couldn't be met. Bancroft created some documentation for Howard County stating that he was receiving these services all along. Did they forget that they said that they could not provide the services? At that point, I received an email from Howard County with all of this documentation showing he was getting all of these services throughout the years. But nowhere on his IEP was that documented. So not only did Howard County, without my knowledge or consent, maintain a placement where my son could not receive the psychological services and counseling that he was required to receive on his IEP, they accepted false documentation from the Bancroft School, which resulted in him not receiving any compensatory services for psychological services and counseling for the entire school year that he had no IEP. The only way the state could find this to be a violation is if there is no documented evidence that those services were provided. Well, it was found to be a violation. However, in August of 2023, suddenly there was this mysterious documentation that just appeared, created by Bancroft, provided to Howard County, showing that my son was receiving psychological services and counseling over the years, even though none of this was ever documented on his IEP. If it's not on the IEP, it's not done. Moving right along, allegation number 4, 5, and 6, educational placement evaluation of the student and provision of documents prior to the IEP team meeting. Regarding allegation number 4, determination of the student's placement. In determining the educational placement of a child with a disability, each public agency must ensure that the placement decision is made by a group of persons, including the parents and the other persons knowledgeable about the child, according to 34 CFR 300.116. Additionally, this placement must be determined at least annually based on the child's IEP and as close as possible to the home, according to 34 CFR 300.116. Moreover, in selecting the least restrictive environment, consideration should be given to any potentially harmful effects on the child or on the quality of service that he or she needs. Interestingly, it mentions the least restrictive environment. I wouldn't call secluding a student in a certain part of a school and isolating him in a classroom the least restrictive environment. That seems like the maximal restrictive environment. It also mentions that any potentially harmful effects or the quality of the service should be considered in making a placement. Well, first of all, it states that this decision needed to be decided by a group of people, including the parent. I was not invited, therefore I was not included. Secondly, it also states that considerations for any potentially harmful or quality of care and service should be considered when making a placement. I wouldn't think that it would be an acceptable practice for any school district to maintain a placement for a student who has already reported an incident of abuse. The student has expressed that he is afraid to return due to retaliation. The parent has expressed concerns about returning since there are no monitoring tools in place, and no monitoring tools were still in place at that time. If there were no monitoring tools in place that the school system could provide to the parent to assure that child's safety, I can't understand why the child would be forced to go back to that environment and the parent would be forced to make that type of decision. This should not have been an option. Allegation number 5, evaluation of the student. A public agency must ensure that the reevaluation of each child with a disability is conducted if the public agency determines that the educational or related service needs, including improved academic achievement and functional performance of the child, warrant the reevaluation, or if the child's parent or teacher requests the evaluation. These evaluations must occur at least every 3 years. MSCE found this to be a violation by Howard County because my son's reevaluation period was supposed to be May 2022, and it was not done. Allegation number 6, provision of documents prior to IEP meeting. So basically, this was a violation because Howard County did not ensure that I received a copy of his IEP at least within 5 days after that scheduled meeting. So in conclusion, the Maryland State Department of Education provides student-specific requirements and systemic requirements of the county. So regarding the systemic requirements, this is basically just homework for the county to do, to develop tools and to come up with reasons why and how are they going to do better and things of that nature, not anything that's going to really affect my child, as at this point, I was not sending my son back to the school. However, the student-specific requirements, MSCE required that Howard County provide documentation showing that they had met with the IEP team by September 15th. And this included determination of appropriate behavioral supports and services, transition activities, and placement has been completed for the student. Well, during that time, there was no placement completed, but Howard County just basically ignored the student-specific requirements that were required of them by the state. It stated that he was supposed to have all these compensatory services calculated by this time, which was not done. So these are the student-specific requirements that Howard County was held to have completed by September 15th, 2023. As we know, his placement didn't occur until January 2024, and the compensatory services were not granted until February 2024. And the state did nothing regarding these massive, significant delays, but they're number one. So what do you expect? So on September 25th, 2024, I sent a complaint to the Maryland State Department of Education because I had written an email to Howard County regarding concerns that I had, multiple concerns. In this complaint, my main request was to have Howard County to respond to my concerns. That was it. So instead of receiving a response from Howard County, I received a letter from the state, and they are answering for Howard County. basically regarding my complaint that I raised concerns regarding Howard County Policy 1030, which was the abuse and neglect, Title II of the American Disabilities Act, the Interstate Compact Agreement, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1974, which was based on retaliation. And it goes on to say that, the Maryland State Department of Education, they're unable to investigate issues related to those concerns. In order to address Howard County Policy 1030, that I would need to file a complaint with Howard County, which I made them aware Howard County was not responding. So how do you file a complaint directly with the county when they don't respond? No one responds. My expectation of the Maryland State Department of Education, since they had already documented that Howard County needed to have better communication with the parent, was that the state would enforce this and make Howard County respond to my email, which they did not. It also goes on to say that there is no individual right of action under the Interstate Compact, that a parent may take any type of legal action under the terms of the compact. This is a perfect example of how the twisting of words. I didn't say anything about legal action regarding the Interstate Compact. I just simply asked for a response from Howard County regarding my concerns, which none of this was ever addressed. So it also states that I raised concerns about my son's education record regarding false documentation and possibly inaccurate information regarding the Bancroft School provision of counseling services. And it goes on to further say that your son has the right to request to review the education record and whatnot, which was not what I was asking for. This was not what I was looking for either. I was looking for a direct response from Howard County, not from the state, to respond to my questions. So it also mentions finally that I have raised concerns about my son's placement at the Bancroft School he did not attend since summer 2023. And it goes on to say that there were many IEP meetings, many referrals to other schools, and many other proposals that were discussed during that time frame in question. Well, during that time frame that was in question, all I knew was that my son had a 14-day rule that if he did not return back to his bed, he would lose his placement. There were no meetings. There was no correspondence regarding his placement during that time frame until the 21st of August. So you can see how the game here is being played in this documentation, making it look like Howard County did everything in the world that they could possibly do to help my child to get on track. However, the reality is they made a placement and did not include me. It also goes on to say that Howard County is continuing to fund the placement until October 2023 is not relevant because they didn't force my son to attend Bancroft. Rather, they continue to seek placement or programs that you would be in agreement with. Are you serious? Funding a placement that a student was not required to attend is not a violation of the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Well, according to Howard County, if my son did not attend, then he would not receive the services on his IEP that are required under the Individuals with Disability Education Act. So I'm not sure what the state is talking about here. So how can you say that this is a placement that he's not required to attend? Because he's 21? Because he was over 18? I mean, under 18, I understand you are required to attend, but just the fact that he is a special education student under their care, this is a perfect example of the state twisting its words around, basically supporting Howard County, because this is clearly a violation. And they know that. If they go back and look at the final reports of the complaints that were made after each of these allegations, in those summaries, it gave clear violations that the state did not hold Howard County accountable for, which is why they skate through and have no consequences.